He fired me while I was sitting on a beach chair halfway through the first real vacation I'd taken in 4 years. No warning, no meeting, just a smug little email that said my position had been eliminated effective immediately. What he didn't know was that before I boarded that plane, I had already copied everything, and within 60 days, federal agents were crawling all over his office like ants on a dropped candy bar. For almost 6 years, I worked for a mid-sized government contracting firm called Apex Municipal Solutions. On paper, we specialized in infrastructure support and compliance services for small cities and county agencies. In reality, we were one of those bland, forgettable companies that existed entirely on taxpayer money and PowerPoint lies. We handled procurement support, grant administration, project oversight, and a whole lot of consulting that mostly involved billing the government for emails, meetings, and pretending spreadsheets were strategy. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, and for a long time I convinced myself it was stable. That's what people tell themselves when they're good at their jobs and too busy to notice they're working under a sociopath. My boss, Daniel Mercer, was the kind of executive who mistook intimidation for leadership. He loved urgent emails sent at 11:47 p.m., public humiliation disguised as performance coaching, and those weird fake laugh moments in meetings where he'd insult someone and then stare at the room until everyone else joined in. He also had one very useful talent. He knew how to make government clients feel important, while quietly siphoning money through inflated invoices and creatively padded deliverables. At first, I didn't fully understand how dirty things were. Like a lot of white-collar fraud, it was hidden under layers of jargon and normal-looking process. A duplicate consulting line here, a mysteriously expanded oversight fee there, timesheets that somehow reflected 40 hours of work for people who were visibly golfing on Tuesdays. The deeper I got into operations, the more impossible it became not to see it. My role was Director of Project Controls, which basically meant every internal budget, billing package, subcontractor summary, and client-facing project report crossed my desk at some point. And once I started really looking, patterns jumped out everywhere. Federal grant-funded municipal projects being billed for field verification that never happened. Compliance audits billed twice under different department codes. Equipment reimbursements submitted with recycled serial numbers. One project even charged a county transportation grant for environmental site visits to a parcel that had been underwater for 9 months. That's not a joke. We literally billed for site inspections on land Google Earth could tell you was a swamp. The person behind most of it was Mercer. Not alone, obviously. People like him always build little circles of silence around themselves. But he was the engine. He signed off on the inflated invoices. He pushed managers to optimize utilization. He had a phrase he loved. If the contract ceiling exists, that means the client expected us to hit it, which is executive speak for steal neatly. I started documenting everything quietly about 8 months before the firing. Not because I had some grand revenge fantasy, but because I had reached that awful stage where you realize if this ever blows up, the cleanest person in the room still gets dragged if they don't protect themselves. So I became meticulous. I saved internal emails, exported invoice versions before they were adjusted, archived Slack screenshots where Mercer literally told a finance lead to bury the overage in the federal reimbursement bucket. I copied approval chains, subcontractor discrepancy notes, even one hilariously arrogant voice memo where he said, "No one from DC is going to audit a wastewater grant in a county nobody can pronounce." That one ended up becoming my favorite. By the time summer rolled around, I had a folder on my personal encrypted drive labeled insurance. I didn't know if I'd ever need it. I just knew I wasn't going down for anybody else's crimes. Then, for the first time in years, I took a vacation. A real one. 7 days in Mexico. No laptop. No client calls. No pretending the world would collapse if I didn't answer Teams messages from a guy who thought circle back was a personality trait. I had barely made it to day 3 before Mercer started texting. First, it was quick question, nonsense. Then, need your eyes on something. Then, call me ASAP. I ignored all of it, because for once in my life, I was committed to being a human being with boundaries. That apparently offended him. At 10:13 a.m. on a Wednesday, while I was halfway through a terrible resort coffee and trying to decide whether to snorkel or continue doing absolutely nothing, my phone buzzed with an email from HR. Subject line, Organizational Restructuring Update. That's never good. I opened it, and there it was. Due to evolving business needs and internal restructuring, my role had been eliminated effective immediately. My system access would be revoked by end of day. A separation package would follow. No phone call, no discussion, no warning. 6 years of cleaning up their messes, and they fired me like I was a seasonal cashier who stole from the register. I just sat there staring at the screen while the ocean did its whole calm, expensive postcard routine behind me. Then Mercer texted me 2 minutes later. Nothing personal. Timing made sense. Best of luck. That's the message that changed everything. Because firing me was stupid. Firing me while I was out of the country with no access to defend myself, after months of quietly documenting their fraud, that wasn't just stupid. That was suicidal. I didn't panic. I didn't call HR. I didn't send some emotional all-staff email that would have made me feel powerful for 12 seconds and accomplished nothing. I ordered another coffee, went back to my room, opened my personal drive, and started building the package. See, the one thing Mercer had never understood about people like me is that competence looks boring until it becomes lethal. By the end of that afternoon, I had organized months of evidence into a clean, chronological, idiot-proof reporting set. Contract numbers, project names, federal funding streams, inflated billing examples, approval emails, side-by-side invoice revisions, internal instructions, timekeeping discrepancies. The whole thing read like a white-collar horror novel written by a spreadsheet with a grudge. And because I'm not an idiot, I didn't send it to a journalist first. I sent it where it would actually hurt. Apex handled work tied to federal transportation grants, municipal infrastructure reimbursements, and a Department of Housing and Urban Development subaward program routed through county agencies. That meant multiple oversight channels, multiple fraud triggers, multiple ways for one arrogant man's little accounting circus to suddenly become very, very expensive. I filed a formal whistleblower complaint through the appropriate federal inspector general channels and attached enough documentation to make some poor investigator's week incredibly interesting. Then I sent a separate, carefully worded disclosure packet to the County Procurement Oversight Office for 2 of our biggest clients, making it crystal clear that I was a terminated senior employee with contemporaneous records showing probable billing fraud tied to federally reimbursed work. No dramatics, no threats, just facts, timestamps, attachments, and enough receipts to wallpaper a prison cell. Then I went snorkeling. That's not me being poetic. I literally filed the complaint, shut my phone off, and went swimming with tropical fish while Daniel Mercer unknowingly walked into the first day of the worst quarter of his life. The first sign that the bomb had landed came 5 days later while I was still on vacation. I got a voicemail from a number in D.C. introducing themselves as an investigator attached to an inspector general intake team. They wanted to schedule a secure interview. Good sign. Then came an email from a county procurement attorney asking whether I'd be willing to authenticate certain internal billing records for purposes of immediate contract review. Better sign. By the time I got home, Mercer had already started spiraling. I know this because the first thing I saw when I reactivated my work burner phone was 12 missed calls from 3 different former co-workers and 1 hilariously panicked text from our finance controller that just said, "What did you do? Beautiful." Apparently, within a week of my termination, 2 county clients had frozen pending reimbursements tied to Apex projects. 1 federal oversight office had requested source documentation for a set of suspicious invoices, and someone, bless them, had apparently forwarded my materials to the company's outside compliance counsel. That last one really mattered because nothing terrifies a dirty executive faster than their own lawyer suddenly becoming formal. I agreed to speak with investigators, more than once, and because I had spent months preparing instead of ranting, every interview went exactly how you want those things to go. Boringly, devastatingly well. I didn't speculate. I didn't exaggerate. I just walked them through the documents and explained how the internal process worked, which reports were manually altered, which billing codes got used as hiding spots, which projects were being padded to hit reimbursement thresholds, which employees were following instructions versus actively designing the fraud. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in watching people with badges and accounting certifications realize you've handed them a fully assembled case with tabs. It's like giving a hungry dog a steak and a map to the butcher. About 3 weeks later, one of my former co-workers, who had the survival instincts of a cockroach and the gossip habits of a hairstylist, called me from a blocked number and said, "Federal people were here." I said, "At the office?" She said, "And the storage room, and finance, and Daniel's office." I almost asked her to repeat it just to hear it again. Apparently, investigators and contract auditors had shown up unannounced requesting records, device images, invoice histories, subcontractor agreements, and communications tied to several projects I had flagged. Mercer, according to her, had tried to play charming for about 20 minutes before shifting into visible panic when he realized they already had internal emails. That's the thing about liars. They're only calm until they realize you know which drawer the bodies are in. Then they become deeply sweaty. Over the next month, the company started coming apart in slow, expensive pieces. One municipal client suspended all pending renewals. Another demanded repayment review on 3 closed projects. 2 subcontractors hired lawyers. The CFO quietly resigned to pursue other opportunities, which is corporate for jumped out of a burning plane wearing someone else's tie. And Mercer? Mercer went full bunker mode. He stopped coming into the office regularly, started using outside counsel as a human shield, and apparently tried to frame the whole thing internally as retaliation from a disgruntled former employee. That might have worked if I had sent angry texts or posted vague revenge nonsense online, but I hadn't. I had done the opposite. I had behaved like the world's most organized nightmare. Every claim I made was documented. Every allegation had support. Every timeline matched system logs. You can't disgruntled employee your way out of a spreadsheet that knows where the money went. About 6 weeks after I got back, I got a call from one of the federal investigators letting me know, carefully, professionally, that multiple matters had advanced beyond preliminary review and that my documentation had been materially useful. That's investigator language for, yeah, this guy is cooked. I won't pretend I didn't enjoy that sentence. Then came the part Mercer absolutely deserved. One of the county agencies issued a public notice of contract termination for cause pending findings related to billing integrity and procurement compliance. Public notice. His name wasn't on the first line, but everyone in our industry knew exactly whose fingerprints were all over those accounts. Within days, local business press picked it up. Then trade newsletters. Then LinkedIn, where people pretend they're above gossip while reading every sentence twice. Apex became toxic overnight. Recruiters stopped calling their people. Vendors tightened payment terms. Clients started asking questions in writing instead of over lunch. It was financial sepsis. And the federal side? That moved slower, but heavier. I'm not going to pretend every bad executive ends up in handcuffs by Friday. Real life isn't that cinematic. But when the federal government decides you're worth the paperwork, your life becomes a parade of subpoenas, interviews, audits, and very expensive mornings. Mercer's did. I know, because months later, one of the attorneys I'd worked with during the cleanup called to thank me for my professionalism and casually mentioned that Daniel was no longer in a position to manage or certify any government-funded work, which in his world was basically professional death. No contracts, no board credibility, No charming little conference panels about leadership in public-private partnerships. Just a guy with a lawyer, a ruined reputation, and a lot of very uncomfortable questions to answer. As for me, I landed better than I expected. Funny how that works when you're not the one committing fraud. I consulted independently for a while, then took a role with a firm that actually has an ethics department nobody laughs at. My blood pressure dropped, my sleep improved, and every now and then, when I'm having a particularly peaceful afternoon, I think back to that little HR email hitting my phone while I was on vacation. Because Mercer thought firing me from a beach chair would make me powerless. He thought cutting off my access would erase what I knew. He thought he could humiliate me on a Wednesday and go back to billing fake site visits by Monday. Instead, he handed a documented insider with nothing left to lose the cleanest possible motive to stop protecting him. That's the thing about arrogant bosses. They always think the people doing the real work are disposable right up until one of those people decides to become a witness. And once that happens, even a beach can't make the timing bad. So tell me honestly, if your boss fired you during vacation after months of shady behavior, would you have exposed him too? Drop your opinion in the comments, and subscribe for more workplace revenge entitled Boss Stories and satisfying real-life drama.